Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Caleb Rogers, and welcome to my podcast. Today we're delving deeper into the mysterious case of Jack the Ripper and revealing his true identity. After you listen to my reasoning, all 15 minutes of it, maybe less if I don't drag, you might be convinced as to why I think Jack the Ripper is none other than Aaron Kosminski, the crazed barber. In terms of mysteries of the criminal world and the question of who done it that eclipses all others, there is none more mysterious than who Jack the Ripper was. You might have seen countless stories on the subject or movies, read myriad books on the topic, or listened to a plethora of online sleuths who think they have solved the mystery, but let's face it, it has always been a guessing game. There has been absurd speculation as well as a more thorough investigation, but the man who eviscerated a woman on the side of the London streets has never had his Scooby-Doo-esque denouement. But as we speak, some new kids on the block might have figured this mystery out. If you're unfamiliar with the history of this serial killer or just need a refresher, I'll give you a quick rundown of the strife and crimes of Mr. Ripper, and give context to the period in which this atrocity took place. Towards the 1880s in the city of London, perhaps the center of the world at the time, but also in parts a dirty, rotten, festering maze of slums replete with wandering gin addicts and foul-mouthed harlots, London was experiencing a population explosion with immigrants from around the world coming to the great city to find work. But it wasn't exactly the land of hope and glory for everybody, and some of the streets in the poor east end of the city were a long way from being a yellow brick road. The rise in population not surprisingly caused friction between the new denizens and the ones born on the cobbled streets. While the factory owners were happy with the cheap labor, these were fractious times, and outbreaks of violence and other criminality were common. This is where our man Jack the Ripper chose to ply his trade. You might ask, what was his trade? Well, that was nabbing mostly working girls from the street and brutally killing them. He might tear at their faces with a sharp blade like a wild animal might do, but other times, he skillfully removes their organs with the deft hand of a surgeon. For this, he became known as the Ripper. It's thought that he may have murdered 11 people, but the cops only ever said for sure that he killed 5. These became known as the Canonical 5. Now, we don't usually attribute canons to killers, but Jack was special. These were real people, each with their own stories, tragically cut short by the brutal hand of the Ripper. The first canonical victim of Jack the Ripper was a 44-year-old woman named Mary Ann Polly Nichols. On August 30th, 1888, after leaving her lodging house to earn money via prostitution, she was found dead on Whitechapel Road an hour later. However, the death of a prostitute was nothing new in Whitechapel, as it was a dangerous work, but it was the way Nichols had been killed that was so shocking. Not just that she was murdered, but how she had been severely mutilated. Her throat was cut deeply by 2 strokes, one of which had completely severed the tissue down to the vertebrae. Additionally, her abdomen had violent incisions inflicted upon both sides. The lower part of her abdomen was partially ripped open by a deep, jagged wound, causing her bowels to protrude. 1 week after the grim discovery of Nichols' body, on Saturday the 8th of September, the body of 47-year-old Annie Chapman was found. Like Nichols, Chapman also suffered from alcoholism, lived in a lodging house, and resorted to prostitution to earn money, but Chapman's throat, like Nichols', had also been slashed. Her vocal cord severed, rendering her unable to scream. Additionally, her abdomen had been entirely sliced open, and she was disemboweled. A section of flesh from her stomach had been deliberately placed upon her left shoulder, while another section of skin, flesh, and small intestines were placed above her right shoulder. The autopsy revealed that sections of her bladder had also been removed, suspected to have been taken by the killer as a sick souvenir. On the early morning of September 30th, 1888, Jack the Ripper claimed 2 more victims within an hour. The first was Elizabeth Stride, a 44-year-old woman found by Louis Dumschutz in Dutfield's yard. Stride's body had minimal injuries compared to the other victims, which led to some to question if she was a victim of the Ripper at all. The key injury observed was a cut on her neck, which was the cause of her death. The lack of further mutilation might have been due to the interruption of the killer by Dumschutz's approaching horse-drawn cart. Shortly after Stride's discovery, Catherine Eddowes, aged 46, was found in Meert Square, less than a mile from where Stride was found. Her injuries were extensive, her throat was severed, her abdomen disemboweled, and her face disfigured. Her left kidney and most of her uterus had also been removed. The killer went further with his mutilation. disfiguring her face and nose, removing her nose entirely. Her cheeks were slashed, and she had cuts incised vertically through each of her eyelids. The police surgeon estimated the mutilations took at least 5 minutes. This night became known as the double event. And nearby, police found a section of Edo's bloody apron and a chalk message implicating Jews in the murder. The message read, "The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing." The connection to the case is unclear, and the message removed before dawn to prevent potential anti-Semitic riots. Mary Jane Kelly, the youngest and last known victim of Jack the Ripper at only 25 years old, was brutally murdered on November 9th, 1888. Unlike the other victims who were killed outdoors, Kelly was murdered within her rented home at 13 Miller's Court in Dorset Street. This indoor setting provided the killer with more time to carry out his gruesome work without interruption. The discovery of Kelly's body the next morning revealed a horrifying scene. Her body was found in the middle of the bed, her throat severed down to the spine, and her face was hacked beyond recognition. Her abdomen was almost completely emptied of its organs, with both breasts sliced off and placed around the room. Her uterus, kidneys, liver, and spleen were also removed, with sections draped around the bed and on the bedside table. Her thighs were stripped of skin, flesh, and muscle, and her heart was missing, speculated to have been taken by the killer. Doctors estimated the murderer spent about 2 hours with her body. The cause of death was determined to be the slash to her throat, followed by the extensive mutilations. Kelly was the last of the victims of Jack the Ripper, ending his reign of terror, with assumptions that the crimes ended because the culprit either died, was imprisoned, institutionalized, or emigrated out of the city. However, they never got their man, and the case went on for years. There have been other suspects over the time in addition to Aaron Koszminski, including people like Walter Sickert, Prince Albert Victor Christian Edward, the Duke of Clarence, Montague John Druitt, Michael Ostrog, Francis Tumblety, and James Mayberg, none of which have been definitively proven to be the infamous serial killer, but have been considered suspects in the Jack the Ripper case for various reasons. In all of these cases, while there were reasons for suspicion, the evidence was either non-existent, circumstantial, or not directly linked to the crimes, making it insufficient for a definitive conclusion. The lack of advanced forensic techniques at the time also made it difficult to gather and analyze evidence efficiently. None of these theories added up, except in one case. One I find to be highly convincing and probable. Aaron Koszminski. Aaron Koszminski was a Polish Jew who was a barber in Whitechapel on the East End of London. Yeah, imagine getting a close shave from a Polish farmer who has a penchant for slicing people open. Why do I suspect it was him? It's because Koszminski's presence in the vicinity of the murders, coupled with his history of mental illness and violent behavior, aligns with the profile of the Ripper. On top of that, according to a forensic investigation published in the Journal of Forensic Sciences in March of 2019, they were able to link his DNA to evidence found on one of the victim's jaws, adding weight to his candidacy, albeit amidst some controversy regarding the reliability of the findings, which I will dive into momentarily. Furthermore, Koszminski's sporadic institutionalization and periods of violent outbursts further contribute to his potential as the perpetrator. However, skepticism remains due to the challenges in definitively proving his involvement and the limitations of the forensic evidence, as it was a while back, and some genetic evidence may have been altered. Okay, so you may have all heard this before, but one of the major issues back then was that none of the DNA evidence was supported. It was mostly the work of a well-off businessman and Ripper researcher called Russell Edwards. However, one of the main issues that discredits this research finding was the fact that the evidence was not peer-reviewed by any other scientists. But it has been now. 2 geneticists, Harry Lutemline and David Miller, ran genetic tests on semen and blood on the shawl that I mentioned earlier that was found next to the murdered Catherine Eddowes. They then compared mitochondrial DNA from Eddowes' present family members as well as the people from the present Koszminski family. They concluded that the Ripper was indeed one of their ancestors. They also said it's very likely Jack the Ripper had blue eyes and brown hair, and this is what many mainstream news media's outlets were reporting. Finally, we found our man! Jack the lad was a 23-year-old who went to London and trimmed mustaches, cut hair, and also the odd stomach wide open. Researchers wrote in the paper that the Shaw is the only piece of physical evidence known to be associated with these murders. The DNA found on that Shaw should be passed down from mother to mother, and DNA could be traced back to the Polish man's family. We know quite a bit about our boy who moved to Whitechapel area, a slum in London, and there he set up shop, but it's said that 3 years after the murder took place, in 1891, Mr. Kosminski was sent to one of London's finest insane asylums. He was an on and off lunatic, doing some barber work and then being looked after by his family, and then sometimes he was back inside with the people screaming at the moon. It's said he suffered a kind of psychosis. It's also said his utterly insane behavior led him being sent to the workhouse. What we have is a man who was in and out of asylums while those murders were going on. So you could say his face now fits the picture. There's also evidence in those psychiatric reports that he had threatened a sister with a knife, which only further demonstrates his violent tendencies. Although these factors seem convincing and hold up stronger than the remainder of the other suspects, the thing that does not completely sell me on the idea that Aaron Kosminski is truly Jack the Ripper is that he doesn't sound much like a skilled surgeon or a man who was adamant enough to never leave any added evidence behind. And on top of that, we have the naysayers, who only further extend our doubts. These critics were doubtful of the first time the Polish man was connected to the murders, and see the latest conclusions were partly predicated on that original 2014 paper. Forbes reported just after everyone was saying, "Finally, we found it," that the new paper contained 3 parts hogwash. Furthermore, challenging the legitimacy of the Shaw once again, Forbes cites a group of archaeological geneticists who said that even if the Shaw was left behind by a victim, still, the way it's been handled since would render DNA analysis cripplingly problematic. Why is that? Well, it's been an item over the years that has been passed around, touched by many, many hands, and left in places for people to view. The scientists claimed that the Shaw itself was hardly eligible for DNA analysis, while others questioned how it even got past review, as it had no primers, present data, or no proof of it being completed in a proper forensic DNA lab, deeming it unpublishable. But surely you can't just discount the new paper. Well, one person in the geneticist's milieu made a very good point about the suspect. The geneticist took note that this male suspect had no way of passing along this mitochondrial DNA, as it is generally not passable by men, and a man he most certainly was. These academics don't mince their words either, sometimes sounding like they're prepared to take a straight razor to the jugular of those who publish the paper. Many academics argue that nonsense like this paper and global media do nothing but ferment scientific and historical illiteracy, built upon the grotesque romanticism of the brutal murders of 5 women. But as others pointed out, you can't just go around saying it was the Kosminski kid without having absolute irrefutable proof. To this day, many are confident that the question of his identity will never be known. This begs the question of if Kosminski did do it, was he clever enough to just disappear after each murder? How come he never told anyone else, not even when he was locked up in the asylum? Where did he get the surgical skills from? Can we not find out if any of the murders happened during the spurts he had outside the asylum? As for new evidence, the researchers had admitted that they would not use it if it were for a present criminal trial. Can we rely on that Shaw and the new results? Maybe. For my last point, I'm going to quote from my last article and tell you what one of the other scientists in the bio game said, and he was less critical than the angry mob of geneticists. The data, at least in the weak form presented here, increased the likelihood that Aaron Kosminski, who was a suspect in the murders, was the killer, he said. But we're a long way from knowing who butchered those 5 women. Cavant lector. Although Jack the Ripper remains a mystery to this day, I'm sure our advancements in technology will help us truly identify him. But from what information we have now, out of all the suspects, my money would be on Aaron Kosminski. What do you think? That's all the time I have. Thank you so much for listening. Have a good one. Bye-bye.